I can see it right now at the Sony executive's office. It's a movie about the hottest summer on record, and it becomes frozen over in a complete wasteland. When do we want to put that out? Summer? Maybe summer, cool off with the new Ghostbusters. Or maybe winter, warm up with the new Ghost. What about the first day of spring, for absolutely no reason whatsoever? Hey, what's up? My name is John Bonjour. I'm an artist and a film enthusiast. This is not my home. This is not my home. This is my sister's apartment. Thanks, Anna and Jamie. This is a cooler background, quite honestly, than what I had before, but I do have to kind of hold the mic as if I'm going to do a cool little rap interlude. I am not. I have drawn some art, and I would like to enthuse about some film. Today, I want to talk to you about Ghostbusters Frozen Empire. A little preamble for this, I am a huge Ghostbusters fan, so if you don't really like Ghostbusters up to this point, this review is going to mean nothing to you. It's going to mean nothing to you. My point being, take this review with a huge grain of salt, or maybe a small grain of salt. I don't actually know how that phrase works. Does a bigger grain of salt mean that there's more weight to it, or is it a smaller grain of salt? Or is a bigger grain of salt, you're taking it with more salt, so it's like diluting it more? I don't think I understand how the English language works, quite honestly, most of the time. So let's just dive right in. I'm going to start non-spoiler, and then we're going to go spoilers after that. The greatest thing about this movie is that it's a Ghostbusters movie. It's like not even close. The things that I think work super well about this are just, the same things that worked really well about Afterlife and didn't really work about the remake that they tried to do. This is just a good, solid Ghostbusters movie made by Ghostbusters fans. It's clear that there is so much love for the franchise. They adore the first movie. Don't we all? I hope. You should. You feel however you want to feel. These movies have such a reverence for the originals in a way that you don't really see with a lot of the requel kind of things. I feel like most of the time a requel will either honor the original way too much to the point where it's like you can't buy into the story because they're constantly touching on things and redoing things from the original. I actually think Afterlife is a really good example of that kind of requel where you're like, hey, that was a fun movie, I enjoyed it, but we just did the first one again. Or they can have a tendency to just not care about the original at all, and you're like, okay, why are we even calling it this if it's not going to be connected to the franchise even slightly? I think the things that I didn't like about Afterlife, the things that I kind of clocked even the first showing that I was like, this might not age super great. Doing Gozer again, having Paul Rudd become one of the dogs, like all of those kinds of things where you're like, that is just straight up pulled from the original. Those are gone in this movie, and I think that is a huge step up. I liked the characters that they introduced in Afterlife, and I love what they're doing to kind of develop them and make them more interesting. Another huge positive is the way that they treat their legacy characters. The original Ghostbusters, Janine Melnitz, like having these characters come back is great. But if you do it wrong, it can kind of feel like they're immortal or like in No Way Home, they kind of haven't developed at all, which kind of works for that because you can argue that they just plucked them from that moment. The point being, these are characters who in this film have lived the originals, and they have lived a lot of life between the originals and now. And I feel like there had to be a temptation to keep them almost exactly the same. Which, for some, like Bill Murray's character, I think he is very much more similar to his original, but that kind of fits his character, like he would be the same. Whereas with Ray and Winston, they've grown, they've developed, they're different people who have the same heart, which has got to be really hard to do. I can't imagine writing these characters in a way that's honoring and also interesting. That cannot be easy, but they're doing a good job. I like these new Ghostbusters movies. That's absolutely not to say that they're perfect. I think that they are both flawed in different ways. This one, I think the biggest flaw is just that it doesn't really care about the movie it's making, which is kind of a weird place to be because I also a little bit didn't care about the movie it was making. Like, I just liked living in this world, living in this space, growing these characters, hanging out with them, and then seeing some cool ghost stuff. And that is exactly what this movie is focused on. So as a film, it's really disjointed, and the focus is not there. It doesn't get to the story, the plot of the film, until like the third act. It really doesn't develop almost any of that until the last 20, 30 minutes of the movie, which for some I'm sure is going to be really frustrating. If the humor on this doesn't land for you, if the characters aren't interesting, there's going to be a huge chunk of this movie that just isn't anything for you. It just doesn't matter. You're going to hate it. But for me, that tended to work. I found it dragging at moments, but for the grand majority of the film, I really was invested in these characters. I find them engaging and fun. I think they're solid additions to the Ghostbusters universe. I also think they did a really good job kind of narrowing down what worked from Afterlife and developing that into something that works for Frozen Empire. Podcast, love you, buddy. You're not the best part of these movies, probably. It's just not a character who can hold that kind of weight. And I think that they realized that, and for this movie, they went, okay, we could probably put him in the sidelines. He's still there, he's still fun, but he's just hanging out. Wrapping up my non-spoiler thoughts, I really like this movie. I think it was a lot of fun. As a huge Ghostbusters fan, this fits really well into the canon. Like it's an acceptable range of cheesy and weird and goofy and kind of scary sometimes and funny. I think that it fits really well into the Ghostbusters franchise. I hope that they make more of these because I really do like what they're doing here. Now jumping into some spoiler thoughts, I like that this is McKenna Grace's movie, without question. I feel like the original, she was a main character, but it was really Finn Wolfhard's movie. He was kind of our POV character. This is absolutely not true, and this is absolutely not true in Frozen Empire. McKenna Grace is our POV character. We grow a lot through her. She's a really interesting character as the newest Spangler. I like her a lot. I thought in the first one she was cute and fun, but we didn't get a whole ton of depth. I think this does a really great job just adding just a ton of interesting character to her character. But I also appreciate that we don't just abandon Finn Wolfhard. He's still there. He's still got sort of a character arc. I also, just as a Ghostbusters fan, appreciate that they are challenging some of the Ghostbusters things. They're growing what a Ghostbuster means. I like that Winston is just bankrolling all of these Ghostbusters projects, and it almost feels like the New York Ghostbusters are his little side project that he just sort of lets keep happening. I like the idea of a center that's studying the paranormal. That fits with what we know about these characters and about the world. I touched on this a little bit earlier, but my biggest frustration with this movie is that the trailer promised a thing that the movie technically delivered on, but in the very, very end of the movie, it was promoted as this, Ghostbusters in Frozen New York, which technically does happen in this movie, but we've seen the majority of that in the trailers. There's probably a few shots that we haven't seen, but there's not a whole ton. There's a lot of the villain that we hadn't seen, but none of the Frozen New York. And I'm okay with that because it's just like, that's just what this movie is. But if I'm being honest, a little bit bummed out that it feels like they promoted a movie that they didn't really make. I would have liked to see Ghostbusters traversing this frozen empire. We just didn't. We just kind of didn't. Like I said, I'm okay with it. I understand that would be a much bigger budget than they probably wanted to go for, but it would have been really interesting to see them kind of going around fighting ghosts in this frozen wasteland to get to the main villain. Of course, by the time they got there in this movie, it would have been way too long and I wouldn't want to see it anyway. I also think there's an interesting side plot. McKenna Grace's character befriends this ghost. I'm a little mixed on that plot as a whole. The beginning and end both worked really well. I think that there's some of the connective tissue in there that you just kind of have to go, okay, I guess that's what we're doing now because that's where we wanted to get to. Not a super huge deal. Honestly, my sister and I were talking about it after we saw it. We're not working with Citizen Kane here. I love the first Ghostbusters. It is one of my favorite movies of all time. But as a franchise, it's just not perfect is a very kind way I think I can say that. This is a series that's just riddled with weird choices, strange calls, just odd movies as a whole. So to have a couple of weird, kind of nonsensical decisions happen in this movie is almost nostalgic for me for the franchise as a whole. I mean, this is a movie that acknowledges the second Ghostbusters, where they walk the Statue of Liberty through New York. I don't think that we're really going to have a hard time pushing the boundaries of what we're willing to accept. This franchise is at a point where it can just kind of do whatever it wants, and quite honestly, I really am here for it. I love how in a world with hundreds of extremely soulless reboots and cash grab sequels, these Ghostbusters movies feel like they are fighting to exist. I really appreciate that. These are movies that care about Ghostbusters. These aren't just making Ghostbusters movies to keep rights or because the name is popular. They care about the Ghostbusters. They want to make good Ghostbusters movies. And for my money, they're doing a pretty damn good job. I don't think this is a perfect film. I wouldn't place it above the first one, not even close. I will say, at this exact moment, it's probably my favorite sequel. That's probably a hot take. I just think that Frozen Empire has a better balance. It's more interesting. It's funnier. Having people like James Acaster and Kumail Nanjiani show up for 20 minutes of the movie and just do random dumb shit, I like that a lot. That feels Ghostbusters to me. This is just a really fun movie. I am fully aware that a lot of people probably aren't going to like it just based on the fact that it is part of this requel, hopefully, trilogy. But I really like this movie. I think it's great. It improves so much that I didn't really love from Afterlife. Brings in a lot more of the original flavor. I think that this is just a great direction for the franchise. I hope we get more of these like this because this is so ridiculous and goofy and fun. It's nice to have a franchise that's just pleasant. And this is exactly that. Thank you so much for watching this video and checking out my channel. If you'd like to hear more of my thoughts on movies, TV shows, comic books, perhaps various soups, hit the like button, hit the subscribe button, and comment down below what you'd like me to review next. Or do none of those things because I am not your dad. Oh, and if you have the time, would you take a minute and read my comic, Edge of Bordertown? It is 100% free, and it always will be, on my website, johnbonhart.com. Chapter 3 is on its way. I am working on it right now. Well, not right now, because I'm making a video, but I'm working on it. It is on its way. It's some of the best writing I've ever done.